From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And ahead today on this week's Cattle Market segment, K-State's Glynn Tonsor will provide his updated Domestic Beef Demand Index, what that's saying to the market, and he'll look at the updated projections on Kansas feedlot returns for the remainder of the calendar year. He'll be followed by K-State's Joel DeRouchey, offering his thoughts on the discussions that took place last week at that United Nations Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock International Forum. Joel was among the many presenters at this event. And later, Jeff Wickman with this week's 4-H segment. He'll talk with K-State's Aliah Mestrovich Seay about a 4-H Youth Citizen Open Forum taking place in October. All this and more next on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Thanks for tuning in. This is the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Glad to have you aboard as we get going on this Monday with the weekly cattle market segment, and in the company of Glynn Tonsor. Glynn, as you know, is a livestock economist, K-State Research and Extension. And Glynn will talk about the latest projections on feedlot returns for Kansas feed yards and see if that's improved, among other things today. But the markets last week tried to recover from a very disappointing week prior, and there was some bounce back, but not overwhelmingly so.
Yeah, on balance, I would call the markets a mixed bag, and it depends on which segment you talk about. So we'll just run through it, and we'll see there's some notable ups and downs. But let's just start on the board first. Live cattle October contract closed Friday at 98.10. Is up about $3 from prior week. And likewise, feeder cattle, the October contract Friday was up a little more than $4 actually from 130 before. It closed just below 135. So that's your positive component of the week, if you like. When we look at the cash side, there was fairly limited activity later in the week. Here in Kansas, had about a $100 trade, and Texas, I wrote down 99 and change, is sort of flat, maybe up a little bit from the week before, but still not massive volumes moving there compared to what we think is available. Feeder cattle, AMS called the Kansas market flat to $3 or $4 lower, depending on what weight class. I wrote down 2 of the bigger lots that went through. I believe these were the Salina market. 324 head at 680 pounds went for $145.5. 766 head weighing 876 went for just over 137. Both of those would be a hair down from the week before's quotes. And then finally, we'll look over to wholesale meat. So choice cutout was down more than $6, 220, almost 221. That was down from over 227 the Friday before. And then round this out, select actually closed on 198.60 on Friday, down a little more than $3 from the prior Friday. So to recap that, wholesale meat was down. The board was up, and cash trade was maybe a little bit up on feds, but basically flat or down. So a mixed bag in many ways.
Should the trade be worried, though, about that downturn on the wholesale beef side, or is this more seasonal than anything else?
Well, all else equal, we don't want to see that. I mean, I'm a big believer that cutout going up is reflecting a value of beef, demand for beef, and so forth being strong, and that shows up in higher cattle prices, all else equal. But at any given week, you can obviously have variations. And I'll remind our listeners that all we got to do is go back, roughly a month to where we had a notable widening between box beef prices and fed cattle prices. And at some point, we all knew some of those margins, if you like, were going to narrow. And this may well be one of those weeks. So if you remember, I think this is what we talked about last time I was on, is cold storage stocks were quite low going into the Holcomb event. And I'll remind us of that because buyers of beef, I think, were a little concerned if they were going to be able to get hold of beef. That is one of the reasons that you had a notable uptick in the cutout the week following that fire. Well, over time, we learned more. We now have at least some clarity on when the plant might be up and going again and all those kind of things. Maybe some of that, I won't say that buying interest went away, but some of that buying out of fear may have went away, which is going to depress the cutout a little bit. Really long way of telling you, no, I do not want to see the cutout come down week after week. But I don't think an individual week pullback, given what we've done the last, let's say, 6 weeks, is a sign of a problem in itself.
Now, one of the analyses that you routinely maintain here at K-State, what's called the domestic meat demand indices, and that covers not just beef, but pork and chicken as well. What are the latest indicators from that?
Yeah, so just this morning I was able to update those. These are current through July, just given the time lag and some of the production data that goes into this. But there's a really good story here for the month of July. So the all-fresh beef price is what I use in my beef demand index that I'm referring to here. Based upon that, July beef demand domestically now was up 5% from the same July the year before. And in fact, that actually makes 5 out of 7 months, again, January through July here in 2019, that is up from a domestic beef demand perspective. That's a really good story. Pork is actually up all 7 months, and chicken is up 3 of the 7 months. All 3 meats were up in the month of July, which is good. All else equal, when those domestic demand numbers are strong and improving, we expect cattle prices to be higher than they would have been otherwise. It's easy for listeners to say, okay, we've had lower cattle prices. How do you have that with stronger beef demand? Well, there's lots of reasons for that. We've had, when we look at feeder cattle prices, for example, corn price uncertainty kind of whipsaws the feeder cattle market and so forth. There's a lot of other things beyond just these monthly demand indices that go into price formation. The way I would highlight this is these strong monthly meat demand numbers for all 3 species in July have added support, and the price declines we've observed would have been worse had that not been the case. That would be the punchline from this. The other piece of this, which I don't have to share right now, but I'll put a plug for our listeners, is before today is over, I will post as well to Ag Manager the parallel export meat demand indices, and that will round out, let's call it, the total demand story for the month of July.
This really is the same refrain on demand that we've been talking about for a while. Demand has remained pretty solid, pretty reliable in the face of some factors that might otherwise be negative for the trade.
It has, and there's lots of different ways to kind of cross-confirm that, and I already hinted this a minute ago. There's been lots of discussion about what the cutout values did the week following the Holcomb event. Well, all else equal, if you didn't have confidence by beef buyers that they were going to be able to move beef, you wouldn't have had the ability for those prices to go up the way they did. So that's a cross-check, if you like, on these numbers. Similarly, I'll make the pork complex comment. I made a note here that all 7 months domestic pork demand has been up so far this year per this index. That's a really good thing, given our ongoing challenges to export pork, given what's going on in trade relations and so forth, and we're producing a lot of pork in this country at the moment. If you took that away, we would have even lower hog prices than we have, and we would see probably even additional bearish spillover in the cattle complex. So I think, again, I'm Dr. Demand in some people's eyes. I love studying meat demand. I think it's very essential to do. It's easy to forget how important that is. But the punchline of this is our prices could actually be worse than they have been, and not everybody will appreciate that, but that's what I'm trying to highlight here, and we do have a good demand story currently.
Now we must share the latest K-State feedlot return calculations that you've put together. There's no way to sugarcoat that. The red ink is spilling all over here, but will there be less red ink as we get into the latter part of this calendar year?
So the summary of this would be is I update this monthly, and I believe it was either August 14th or August 15th was the last time that this was updated. So roughly a month ago. The numbers I'm going to share here are as of the close of business on Friday, September 13th. And on balance across these months, not much has changed in terms of projected returns by month. To answer the question, negative returns are projected, and large negative returns basically for the balance of 2019, over $100 and actually over $200 in each month through November, and then losses that are less than $100, but losses nonetheless, all the way out until April closeouts. Now, again, these are projections for when animals will come off feed. In general, those projections get better the further out we go. The bearish projections are worse for the next 2 or 3 months. And what's embedded in that is much higher feeder prices for the animals, what was paid now, 4 to 6 months ago, and the decline that's been realized over the last couple months in fed cattle prices. There's a fairly flat basis projected in this for those that pull this up. There's a lot of discussion in the industry now about whether the basis is going to get stronger or not. I only highlight that for our listeners that are really interested in that. You can take this tool and kind of put your own basis number over the top. But the punchline would be projected fed cattle prices are sufficiently low, and we've had cost of gain concerns that are embedded in this, that adverse margins basically for the rest of 2019 for sure are pretty negative, and that hasn't changed much over the last month.
Well, More numbers coming out from the USDA, both this Friday and a week from today. Friday is the monthly Cattle on Feed report. The expectations there, Glynn?
So, and continuing off of our feedlot returns, core interest is, there's always interest in marketing's placement inventories, those three key numbers, but the ongoing marketing's our ability to do that, stay current, as well as kind of cross-confirm the positive demand story I was alluding to earlier, is what people will be looking for in the marketing's number. But arguably of equal interest is the placement number, given these adverse negative margins we're talking about, is just how cautious are feedlots in placing cattle when we don't have an ability to have a positive hedge placed. Now, we often don't have the ability to have positive hedge, but these are quite negative returns currently and being projected. That puts a bearish tone in a lot of feedlot operators' minds. So just how much does that put the brakes on placements? Those are the two main things I'll be watching for. We always watch for components of this, but when feedlot returns get the way they are now, the interest in that report is elevated. So it's worth everybody watching that. And again, that's this Friday, September 20th is that report. I also want to note the cold storage report comes out a week from today, so on September 23rd. That's important because it's another indicator of if we're staying current on beef movement, not just cattle in the feed yard now, but if we're actually stacking meat up in the freezer, so to speak. The ability to have a cutout spike like we did after the Holcomb event, I've tried to note before, was in part because we had small stocks, which was a good thing in many ways, but we need to monitor that and see if we're building up those stocks or not, again, as an indicator of product movement if it's continuing.
So look for those numbers out in the coming days from the USDA. And lastly, you'll be out and about at a couple of events here in Manhattan toward the latter part of this week, sharing the beef cattle market outlook.
Yeah, so on Thursday, Dr. Dale Blasi here, his Stocker unit always hosts an annual event, the Stocker Field Day, which is just off the edge of campus here in Manhattan. KSU Beef has details on that. And then as well, both Friday and Saturday, there's a meeting that is not an annual event here called Stockmanship and Stewardship. Kansas Beef Council, NCBA, and some others have a hand in planning that. If you're not aware of that, feel free to reach out to those groups or myself to get details. I will be speaking on Saturday morning, giving another beef cattle market outlook talk there as well. So there's two events here in the Manhattan area this week that I look forward to engaging producers at.
Excellent. And if you're attending either or both, be sure to catch Glynn and tap him for his thoughts on these markets directly. And thanks for coming over, Glynn.
Thanks, Eric.
Livestock economist Glynn Tonsor, K-State Research and Extension. He's along with us regularly on Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Welcome back. You are listening to Agriculture Today. And if you've been along with us the past several broadcasts, you'll know that Kansas State University had the distinct honor of hosting the 9th annual Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock International meeting, and that is a function of the United Nations. We wanted to get the take from one of our own here at K-State who was a participant and was a presenter, actually, at one of the sessions during this meeting. Joel DeRouchey is with us. He's a livestock specialist, K-State Research and Extension. Environmental management is one of the hats that Joel wears in that capacity. So, Joel, there were 300-some scientists from all around the world who assembled here at Kansas State. What was your perception of this meeting as you were going in?
Yeah, I think this was a meeting that what I was really intrigued by is as you mentioned it, the amount of people involved around the world really that had the common goal of improving animal agriculture. And there's a lot of different ways, a lot of things we can talk about just because of the different areas of the world and climates that they have to grow livestock ultimately to feed people. It was just really interesting to me to try and get different perspectives of where they've come from and also realize how many countries then are dependent upon more developed countries such as the U.S. to be a global food leader to support their efforts that they have in their countries, but recognize in several of the countries that where we have the population increases, they're simply not able to do that in their own production systems.
Now, the lay audience out there might have seen the title, it's a rather elaborate one, of this meeting and heard about this body of scientists and thought that this was potentially an anti-animal agriculture group. Just the opposite, was it not?
Absolutely. And I know there's different perspectives. It depends on potentially your beliefs in a lot of different areas of what sustainable is. And I think that's a challenging word that I don't even really like to use because of the various definitions. And it really draws emotion into it when we start talking about climate and sustainable and what are all these different systems mean. But really, at the end of the day, this meeting was centered around how we just keep improving. And so this isn't something new. This has been going on for decades and decades. People trying to improve not only animal, but the crops and agronomy and horticulture as well. How we do this to improve the efficiency, improve the profitability, and that was a theme. Everybody recognized whether you have one cow or you're running a large herd in central U.S. and Kansas, economics plays into sustainability, and I never heard a disagreement on that. I think it's just really defining how we move forward, in the next several decades, and in terms of how we look at producing livestock to feed a growing population.
Seemingly, Joel, as one listened to the presentations, one watched the interaction of people even in the hallways, this group appeared to be, generally speaking, very welcoming of technological advances to attain whatever sustainability is defined to be at any given location.
Yeah. I never heard one time during this meeting that we need to pull back or shy away from advances in the technology side. And when we use technology in animal ag, that can certainly draw some emotions of some people. But I think it's people recognizing that we can't be in agriculture in the 1940s and 50s in a modern world that has all the other advancements. And so I think that discussion, and certainly in this, is really put on the side. It was really how can we embrace some of these technologies? How do we get them through the regulatory system that we can actually implement them? And then how do we work with consumers so that they recognize that some of the genetic modifications and the gene editing, we talk about just different management practices and why they're okay. And, one of the topics really centered around, too, is the welfare of animals. Mm-hmm. And the husbandry part has been part of raising livestock in any country and anywhere in the world. And are we doing it in a perceived way that is benefiting or certainly not adverse to the animals? And I think people have come to understand that these different practices, and in the U.S., if we want to talk about, or in Kansas, our modern practices of confinement, of feeding inside of swine and poultry in particular, bringing dairy cattle, depending where their location is it best out in pen setting, or is it best that we pull them in and cross-ventilated inside to provide them an environment that they are healthier and more productive? And really judging animal welfare and how that animal is based on their performance. And that could be reproductive, growth, feed efficiency. Animals that are in a stressed environment don't do well in any of those. And so by providing these environments that allow the animals to express their genetic potential means they're also healthy. And so and not stressed, and they have a good well-being. And that message, man, it's hard to talk about with consumers when you can look and see these animals are inside, and why aren't they outside? That message is so important that we continue to work on, and that's across lots of livestock species. We look at some of the confined feeding of feedlot cattle that has grown rapidly across the Midwestern states. It's due to environment. It's having people understand that those cattle are better being in a pen that's on slats and not being in belly-deep mud, for most of the year when we've had the rainfall events like this last year. And so it's understanding not only modern production, but then the focus of this meeting in several of the countries that need food is how they just develop the basic necessities of raising more animals. When a lot of these families have one cow or one growing steer, in Cambodia, and that was a talk I was part of, presenting all the farm demonstrations that we did with cattle and swine. I mean, a good example in Cambodia, in the U.S., we wouldn't even think twice about not offering free choice mineral and salt to cattle grazing or providing it in any mixed ration that we feed. In countries like that, they simply don't. They don't know that there's a benefit. We did a demonstration of 40 grazing cattle on different farms that we offered a salt lick block, then 20 that we did not. It was their normal practice. And after 6 months, those cattle were approximately 50 pounds heavier when they were offered the lick block. I mean, this is basic things that we've known in the U.S. and developed countries for generations almost. And these are things that they don't understand yet because they don't have a good extension system. They're just getting this information, and so it's providing those opportunities because in those cases we're not worried about gene editing. We're just worried about a balanced diet that's going to give them 50 extra pounds to sell that animal and make money on. So these are things that are part of this meeting as well. We have the developed countries taking it to the next level, but then we have the underdeveloped countries just trying to get the basics to improve their production practices.
Well, over the 4+ days that this meeting took place here on the K-State campus, session upon session upon session of discussion, of exchange of ideas, and it was almost overwhelming how much was happening concurrently there. Mm-hmm. As a participant and as an individual interested in livestock systems yourself, what do you hope comes of this effort, Joel?
Certainly the networking, and it has to be moved beyond that then. So we had the opportunity to meet a lot of different people from different parts of the world. And not only that, even within the U.S., many different agencies, many different groups that are involved, both at a federal level that help with funding and to help. And again, not only in the U.S. funding, but also certainly international as well. And I think one of the take-homes has to be beyond the networking. You make the connections. Then you actually got to do something. Mm-hmm. And so, in our College of Agriculture, we have a large effort in many foreign countries helping them improve their agriculture practices. It's continuing those efforts, and then it's exposing students. We can do these things, and again, I'm in my mid-40s. I get exposed to a lot of different things, but the reason we're at a land-grant university is exposure of the next generation of talent. And it's continuing to get our undergrads and graduate students involved so that they can really help push the needle and be innovative. And the excitement you can see with the undergraduates and graduate students that were involved with this meeting, but it gets them thinking longer term about potential careers as well as the meaning of service and how to help other people and not just themselves.
And as a closing thought, this was a big deal for this meeting to be hosted at Kansas State University, the first time of the 9 sessions that have been held by this group in North America, and the very first time on a university campus anywhere. So kudos to those at K-State who pulled it off.
Absolutely, and I think that speaks to the reputation of the College of Agriculture and Kansas State being a land-grant system that truly is enrooted in the meaning of a land grant in terms of food and fiber and all the different production aspects, along with embracing technology and pushing things forward in the biotech and more basic sciences.
Well, Joel, thanks for coming over, sharing these reflections from that meeting last week, and we'll visit again soon.
Thank you, Eric, for having me on.
He was once again one of the presenters at that 9th Annual Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock International Forum here on Kansas State's campus last week. Joel DeRouchey is a livestock specialist with K-State Research and Extension. You're tuned to the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
You're listening to Agriculture Today, coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University. Eric Atkinson here. And now today's agricultural news headlines for you, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, reports from the Xinhua news agency say that U.S. soybeans and pork will be exempted from additional trade tariffs. That agency citing the Customs Tariff Commission of the State Council with that news. The service also noted the move was after the U.S. decided to make adjustments to the additional tariffs to be imposed on Chinese goods on October the 1st. Plus, that report talked up high-quality U.S. farm products. This backs up a Xinhua report last Thursday, which said the list of 16 U.S. products that would be exempt from additional tariffs were the first set of U.S. goods to be excluded, with Ministry of Commerce spokesman Zhao Feng saying that the Commission would continue to work on the exemption process and release subsequent lists in due course, according to Xinhua. Here's more on the U.S.-China trade status from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
News on the China trade front. First, there are reports that China has removed punitive tariffs on U.S. pork. Earlier, USDA had reported China buying almost 11,000 tons of U.S. pork during the first week of September. And before the news came out about the tariffs, USDA's chief economist Rob Johansson told us because of African swine fever devastating the Chinese pork industry,
even with the tariffs, the U.S. is expanding their exports there.
Meanwhile, reports Thursday of Chinese private firms buying over 600,000 tons of U.S. soybeans. That could be tied also to African swine fever.
China is having a difficult time rebuilding their swine herd right now. But when they do, they're going to have to expand their swine production pretty rapidly to make up for a lot of lost production. How fast and how quickly that happens is anybody's guess.
Also, traders are offering guesses on whether the reduced tariffs on pork and the recent soybean purchases are strictly due to China needing those products or if it's a gesture ahead of planned trade talks. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
Now, relative to the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement, quoting here House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, it boils down to enforceability, and I think it can be achieved. She said that last week. Meanwhile, House Agriculture Committee Chairman Colin Peterson said he expects Congress to vote on USMCA within the next 1 or 2 months. Quoting Peterson, right now, I am optimistic about getting this done. He said that during a rally in Washington in favor of the agreement. Democrats are now examining information sent to them by U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, sparking more optimism that the issue will be headed for a vote. Do want to remind you of that calendar item we mentioned earlier in visiting with K-State's Glynn Tonsor. That is the 2019 K-State Beef Stalker Field Day. Coming up this Thursday, the 12th, the 20th annual Stalker Field Day. It'll take place at the Beef Stalker Unit toward the northwest of Manhattan. Registration, coffee at 9:30. The program itself gets rolling at 10:30. In addition to the beef cattle market outlook, the changing industry structure will be looked at, as well as internal parasite management, humane euthanasia practices, beef basis as better information for marketing decisions, health management of high-risk calves, and a panel discussion on beef parasite control. Still time to register, but check it out at ksubeef.org. The details on the Beef Stalker Field Day here at K-State on Thursday. Time now for this week's Tree Tales from the Kansas Forest Service at K-State. Here's Jason Hartman.
Smokey Bear turned 75 years old this year. To celebrate, the Kansas Forest Service, as you may have seen on our Facebook page, recorded a video and had a little staff party. Wanted to bring to you today some facts about Smokey and then end with a connection you may not have been aware of. Since 1944, Smokey Bear has protected America's forests, rangelands from unwanted, human-caused fire. Smokey is one of the most loved issue ambassadors of our times, and his signature phrase, "Only you can prevent wildfire," is truly iconic. His message of wildfire prevention is the center of the longest-running public service ad campaign in our nation's history. Though Smokey has been essential to the reduction of unwanted human-caused wildfires over the last 75 years, he still needs help, even today. Nearly 9 out of 10 wildfires nationwide are caused by careless people. Some facts about Smokey. The U.S. Postal Service gave him his own postage stamp in 1984. His message has received more than $1.6 billion of donated media support. His historic campaign has been inducted into the Advertising Walk of Fame for being America's favorite advertising icon. He's been to outer space. Smokey Bear is the only person to have their own zip code besides the president. For a 75-year-old bear, Smokey is super tech savvy. He has hundreds of thousands of followers on his social media channels, and he's even had special photo filters and frames on Snapchat. What you may not be aware of, though, is the connection to Kansas of Smokey Bear, and that is Rudolph Rudy Wendelin. Mr. Wendelin was born February 27th, 1910, in Herndon, Kansas, grew up in Ludell, Kansas, both in Rawlins County and northwest Kansas. Wendelin was a student at the University of Kansas School of Architecture and at art schools in Milwaukee and Washington, D.C. He began his Forest Service career in 1933 with the U.S. Forest Service in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, as a draftsman and illustrator. He then transferred to Washington office in 1937. Returning to the Forest Service after a stint as a Navy artist during World War II, Wendelin was given responsibility for the Smokey Bear Project and proceeded to create hundreds of Smokey representations that highlighted natural resources conservation and forest fire prevention. Mr. Wendelin retired from the Forest Service in 1973. Under Wendelin's direction, Smokey assumed the more humanesque form by which he is best known, wearing a solemn expression, ranger's hat and jeans, and carrying a shovel. Wendelin continued his association with Smokey after retiring from the Forest Service in 1973. Producing numerous calendar and book illustrations. Smokey's immense popularity is apparent through the many awards Wendelin received for his work, including the Medal of Honor, presented by the Daughters of the American Revolution, the Horace Hart Award for the Graphic Arts Industry, and both silver and gold Smokey Bear Awards from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Wendelin is also known as a creative painter of landscapes, a sculptor, political cartoonist, and the artist behind the Forest Service 1948 watershed protection film, The Adventures of Junior Raindrop. Woodsy Owl also owns a debt of gratitude to Mr. Wendelin. He designed or co-designed 6 commemorative U.S. postage stamps, including the Forest Conservation Stamp in 1958, the 1964 John Muir Stamp, the 1969 John Wesley Powell Stamp, and the 1984 stamp featuring Smokey Bear that I mentioned earlier. Mr. Wendelin passed away August 31st, 2000 at the age of 90. So on this, the 75th anniversary of the Smokey Bear campaign, we bring to you this connection to Smokey Bear to Kansas. I'm Jason Hartman, Assistant Fire Management Officer with Kansas Forest Service here at Kansas State University, and this has been an installment of Tree Tales.
Many thanks, Jason. Jeff Wickman and this week's 4-H segment, next on Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
Thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. Kansas 4-H and the K-State Institute for Civic Discourse and Democracy are giving youth an opportunity to use their leadership and communication skills to learn how to have difficult conversations. Kansas 4-H Culture and Communication Skills Specialist Aliah Mestrovich Seay says participating in the Community Conversations 4-H Youth Citizen Open Forum on October 26th on the Kansas State University campus will help youth learn leadership skills that they can build upon throughout the new 4-H year, which starts in October.
That is correct, Jeff. This is a pilot program that is encouraging youth to exercise their leadership communication skills to have tough conversations about issues impacting them in our society, issues that matter. This is an event that is going to be helping them prep for other events throughout the year, whether it's Kansas Youth Leadership Forum, Citizenship in Action, or even Citizenship Washington Focus. So we really hope they will take advantage of this.
And this is for middle school and high school age?
Yes, it is. This is open to all 4-H youth in middle school and high school, and they can also invite their friends. This can be considered a recruitment event so that youth in Kansas know what is important to us in 4-H, which is giving back to our community and making a difference.
What are some of the things that will be taking place at this forum?
Well, youth will deliberate on 2 different topics that they actually voted on this summer. So we used the Purple Power Pack Camp Counselor Group. This summer, they went to Rock Springs and actually participated in fundamental conversation and leadership skills. And they voted on some national issues forums that they wanted to discuss during this deliberation. So the 2 main issues that emerged from that training were, how can we prevent mass shootings in our society, and what can we do about the opioid epidemic in the United States?
So how do they tackle this then? How do you go about having this conversation?
First, we will be training youth facilitators this month to exercise their leadership and hone in on their leadership communication skills for this event. Youth participating in October will learn critical guidelines for how they can participate in a civic and civil discussion. Some of those things would be expecting and exploring conversation-style differences and conflict. And also, the framework of this event allows youth to look at 3 different options within those topics. And these 3 different options come from a wide range of different perspectives that the youth can then deliberate on in a civil manner. One option would be exploring how to make mass killings more difficult and preventing certain people from owning certain types of weapons. The second one would be to equip people to defend themselves, and that we should not depend on the police to rescue us. And then finally, another option is rooting out violence and hate in our society that is prevalent in social media and in other ways where people are susceptible to seeing and experiencing violence unnecessarily. But at the end of the day, the goal is to find a solution for the common good of society, which will require compromise and patience.
I think the thing that is probably the most exciting for me is the fact that we're talking about civil conversations, doing this to where we are looking for an outcome, not just to be right, but just to get all of the facts out there and then make kind of an informed decision.
Absolutely, and we follow the 4-H experiential learning model where they will do reflect and apply throughout this entire event with the premise that there needs to be some type of agreement that everyone in their small group will be able to deliberate on and then present back to the group. So there will be multiple small groups that will present their findings, and they could be very similar from each other or very different.
And as you mentioned, this is kind of a building block for some of the other leadership opportunities throughout the year?
That is correct, yes. So we are hoping that youth will be able to think more critically about the current events that are facing their society and really impacting them, their families, and their future, so that when they go to Citizenship in Action or Citizenship Washington Focus, they will have more tools, more leadership communication tools to use when they are asked to do the activities at those events.
This will also help them with activities just within their own 4-H clubs, too.
Yes, we are hoping that we can duplicate this across the state. We also have 4-H agents and volunteers that are coming to be trained to learn how to facilitate and understand the process of civic discourse and public deliberation. People seem to really understand why we're doing this and how logically it is tied to all of the other events that build youth leadership communication skills in Kansas.
When you're doing a pilot project like this, a pilot program, how difficult is it to set the program up so that you're able to really measure effectively what's working and maybe what isn't working?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think having the community partners that we do right now after years of collaborating and working in the community and on campus at K-State, I think it makes it easier. We have partnered with the Center for Engagement and Community Development at K-State, and within that unit is the Institute for Civic Discourse and Democracy. That is a department that is closely related to leadership studies, and that's actually where we will be doing the event in October in Town Hall at the Seay School of Leadership Studies at K-State.
And then, of course, also the feedback from the participants.
Yes, so we really want this to be a youth-centered, youth-sponsored, and hosted event. So we have youth that have already signed up that really want to be part of creating an atmosphere of learning for the day and that are already giving us feedback because they're part of creating this event. So we really want to continue to get their feedback and make sure that they are helping mold what the future outcome looks like for this pilot program.
This is a free day, but there is limited space.
That is correct. So we are using the 4-H program fee to help create a space where anyone that is interested, this can be accessible to them. So we want to thank all the people of Kansas that have contributed to the 4-H program fee, because it's part of that fee that is allowing this event to take place. And yes, there is limited seating for this event.
And they need to be registered by October 14th, and they can do that on the 4-H website?
Yes, they can. They are welcome to go on to the 4-H website and register there. The sooner the better, or they can feel free to contact me at aliah@ksu.edu for more information.
That's Kansas 4-H Culture and Communication Skills Specialist, Aliah Mestrovich Seay. Again, to learn more or to register for community conversations, 4-H Youth Citizen Open Forum, visit kansas4h.org. And that'll do it for the Monday edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.